Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our complimentary webinar series for U.S. federal government contractors. We're coming to you live today from Washington, D.C. You probably found out about today's webinar through our newsletter, which reaches over 23,000 federal government contractors and service providers. Today's session is complimentary and also recorded. You can find the recording on our website and YouTube channel about 24 hours after the webinar, usually sooner though. We have over 540 complimentary webinars on our YouTube channel. This includes all 52 parts of the FAR, all 52 parts of the DFARs, and hundreds of webinars on strategic and tactical topics. If you'd like to advertise in our newsletter or any of our upcoming webinars, please email us at hello@jenniferschaus.com. And a little bit about us, we are a specialized consulting firm focused on working with established federal contractors. We work with product, service, and software firms across the globe. For more information about our services, please visit our website and select About Us. As mentioned, today's webinar covering the FAR supplements is complimentary and recorded. We began this series in January 2022, and you can find these past recordings on our website as well as the future schedule with the registration links. And as you can see here, we've covered several of the FAR supplements already, and we will wind down this series on August the 24th with the Veterans Administration. Then on Fridays, we covered the same agency or department in our Playbook series. The Friday webinars discuss upcoming bidding opportunities, contracting trends, small business resources, and sometimes or oftentimes feature a government speaker. The full schedule and past recordings are on our website under the Playbook tab. And now we would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors who help make this webinar series possible. First, we'd like to thank the Virginia PTAC. Virginia PTAC is based out of GMU in Fairfax and offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you're interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore what PTACs can offer. And a special thanks to the Federal Business Council. The FBC creates and manages virtual and in-person meetings and events to connect industry and government thought leaders, product providers, and solutions with government programs that use them. The FBC works with a variety of federal agencies to connect government and industry in the form of in-person and virtual conferences, training events, policy dialogue, and outreach. Over the last 40+ years, FBC has become a comprehensive resource for connecting industry and the federal government. Next, we'd like to thank Gov White Papers. Finding a reliable online source for keeping up with the latest government tech trends and regulations can be overwhelming and time-consuming. Gov White Papers is a free and easy-to-use resource for the public sector and supporting industries to find and share government and military-related content, saving you time. Topics include U.S. economy, workforce, cybersecurity, AI, and much more. Gain peace of mind understanding trends and technologies to modernize and run your organization efficiently while streamlining technology adoption. Claim your free membership on govwhitepapers.com today to access thousands of government and military ebooks, white papers, infographics, and case studies with fresh content added daily. And lastly, we'd like to thank Dastin. Dastin is an IT and cloud solution provider working with corporations, the military, and government agencies to lower their costs, increase scalability, improve operational efficiency, and meet compliance regulations using targeted cloud-based solutions. Dastin is a certified partner of Oracle NetSuite, a premier tier Google Cloud partner, and certified partner of Cisco, Virtue, AODocs, and Authenticate. For more information about Dastin services or to schedule a complimentary consultation, please email Joe Alston or visit the Dastin website. Okay, thank you again to the attendees and to our speaker for joining us today in the FAR Supplement series. And today we're here to dig into the FAR supplement on the General Services Administration. Our speaker today is Daniel Ramish, and he represents Smith Patcher McWhorter PLC. As a reminder, we don't take any questions, so if you have any questions for Daniel, his contact information will be displayed at the end of the presentation, and you can contact him directly. Thank you, Daniel, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Madeline. As mentioned, my name is Dan Ramish. I'm with the law firm Smith Patcher McWhorter. I don't actually represent the law firm here and speaking to you today. I speak only for myself, particularly with respect to any errors in anything that I say. This information is only offered for informational purposes. It's not offered as legal advice related to any individual situation. But I'm looking forward to spending my lunch hour with you talking about the General Services Administration regulations and manual. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, thank you so much.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about GSA and the Gsar and GSAM first. The different FAR supplements have different things to offer to federal contractors. One of the particularly noteworthy things in the Gsar is the content relating to the federal supply schedule contracts, one of the federal government's most important contract vehicles, and that's addressed in Gsar Part 538. And a lot of the details, the clauses that govern the federal supply schedule contracts are referenced in that part and then included in the Gsar. So those include the commercial sales practices format, that's the heart of GSA schedule offer, the price reductions clause dealing with reductions, EPA price adjustment clause dealing with increases in prices, transactional data reporting, the IFF and sales reporting, order level materials dealing with ancillary materials under schedule contracts, and then the regulations that address modifications to schedule contracts and audits and records. And then I'll touch on a few other items of interest outside of the schedules parts of the Gsar and GSAM. Those include a clause that addresses unenforceable terms in commercial supply agreements. And then we'll talk about a part of the GSAM that addresses interagency acquisitions, and then the section on leases. Next slide. So just wanted to give you some perspective on the General Services Administration. And actually, I started my career in federal procurement with GSA in the Office of IT Acquisition, what used to be Schedule 70. The Federal Supply Schedules program is a big part of what GSA does. It's a massive commercial IDIQ contract vehicle. It includes more than 11 million commercial supplies and services. Agencies spend more than $30 billion a year on schedule contracts. There are more than 3,000 contractors that are on schedule, and IT acquisition is a big part of the schedules program. Traditionally, the largest schedule I mentioned is formerly Schedule 70. The schedules program has been going through consolidation of the legacy schedules into a single unified schedule. Another big part of what GSA does, the schedules program isn't the only interagency IDIQ contract serviced by GSA. There are other important GWACs such as the 8A Stars 3, the Alliant contracts, VET 2, and then multi-agency contracts. GSA also services like OASIS. And then GSA also has, separate apart from those, a major role as the civilian government's realtor, or landlord rather. They have a real property role managing 370 million square feet of owned and leased property for federal agency tenants. Next slide. So the General Services Administration Acquisition Regulation, or GSAR, is at Title 48 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 5. Chapter 1, of course, is the FAR itself, and then the chapters that follow, all within the FAR system, are the different supplements, and Chapter 5 is GSA's supplement. It's the Supplemental procurement regulations. The parts 501 to 553 of the Gsar correspond to FAR parts 1 to 53, as is traditional with the FAR supplements. Part 552 includes the solicitation provisions and contract clauses, as you would expect. And 552, 238.70 through 116 include federal supply schedule contract clauses. There are a couple of other stray schedule contract clauses, but the bulk of them are in that range. And I already mentioned parts of special note, part 538, which deals with the federal supply schedule contracting program, and then part 570, which addresses leases, acquiring leasehold interests in real property. I'll also talk a little bit about the General Services Acquisition Manual, the GSAM. The GSAM should be kind of considered separately from the Gsar. It is not does not have regulatory effect. It's GSA's internal agency acquisition policy, so really governs what the government is supposed to do, and isn't binding on contractors. Of course, the Gsar itself is also written for contracting officers predominantly and is implemented through the clauses, but the GSAM is an additional step removed, but it can still provide helpful perspective for how GSA approaches contracting. Go to the next slide. Okay, so to speak more about the Federal Supply Schedule or Multiple Award Schedule program, again, it's a large contracting vehicle for commercial products and services. It has a standing solicitation, so unlike many solicitations where there's a set proposal phase and a due date, there's no due date. There's open acceptance of offers to go on schedule. The contracts are long-term contracts, 20 years, the 5-year base period and 3 5-year option periods. You can also have blanket purchase agreements issued under schedule contracts for recurring needs. Schedule consolidation was one of the more significant changes to the GSA schedules program in recent memory. That's been an ongoing effort to combine 24 legacy schedules into a single schedule. Another notable feature of federal supply schedule contracting is that schedule orders are exempt from the small business rule of 2, requiring the use of small businesses if there are 2 qualified small businesses that can submit a reasonable offer. So I should mention that the General Services Acquisition Regulation shouldn't be viewed in isolation. Part 538 of the Gsar that addresses the schedule programming has important information about the program, but it's also noteworthy. FAR subpart 8.4 federal supply schedules includes a lot of the mechanics of how schedule contracts are used. And then FAR part 38 federal supply schedule contracting addresses GSA's authorization of other agencies under the schedules program, including the VA, but it touches on coordination with other agencies about potential delegation of schedule authority. There are also some important schedule concepts that aren't in those parts. There are other parts of the FAR and statutes that are very important for schedule contractors, such as the Trade Agreements Act. TAA compliance is a hot button area for schedule contractors. And there are also concepts that aren't captured in any of the regulations or even the manuals. Surprisingly, contractor teaming arrangements, which are an unusual feature of schedule contracting, aren't captured in anywhere in the regulations. So you have to kind of have a holistic perspective in thinking about schedule contracts. And we're talking today about just one important part to consider. So jumping in, Gsar 538-270I, evaluation of offers without access to transactional data. So this is the traditional approach of evaluation of offers under the commercial sales practices approach. This section gives a helpful perspective on how the government approaches a schedule offer and the pricing in a schedule offer. So the government's objective is to seek the offer's best or most favored customer price, and this part of the regulation spells out how the contracting officer compares multiple award schedule and commercial terms. So the CO is going to be looking at the aggregate volume of anticipated purchases, minimum quantity, prices and discounts and concessions, the length of the contracting period, warranties and training and maintenance, and whether that's built into the price or whether that's handled and priced separately, ordering and delivery practices, and other information warranting a lower discount for the government. Next slide. So the government, again, is trying to get most favored customer pricing. They have kind of a laser focus on discounts and concessions, often in how they approach a GSA schedule offer. And the regulation at 538-271 instructs the contracting officer, if the best price is not offered to the government, you should ask the offerer to identify and explain the reason for any differences. So the contracting officer essentially has an obligation to document why the government isn't getting the best price if they aren't. The regulation does say that the contracting officer may award a contract with other than a best price if two requirements: the prices have to be fair and reasonable, even though the discounts aren't as low as most favored customer pricing, and if award is otherwise in the government's best interest. So the contracting officer has to find that the government's best interests are served by making an award. Another important point, important for the contracting officer and also for the contractor, the CO is supposed to state clearly in the award document the price discount relationship between the government and the identified commercial customer or category of customers upon which the award is based. And this is popularly referred to as the basis of award, customer, or class of customer. Can we go to the next slide? So I want to talk a little bit about the commercial sales practices format. It's the centerpiece of a GSA schedule offer, and it discloses the contractor's commercial sales practices about goods and services intended to be offered on schedule. And really what the government's trying to gauge in the CSP is whether the prices offered to the government are equal to or better than most favored customer prices. And if not, the contracting officer will seek to negotiate better terms or require documentation justifying less favorable prices or discounts. So the CSP format is at Gsar 515-408B. It includes the table format, and so it spells out first the dollar value of sales to the general public at or based on an established catalog or market price during the preceding fiscal year or 12-month period. Projected sales to the government under the contract. Again, kind of painting the picture for the contracting officer of the sales practices to be able to evaluate the offer. Can we go to the next page, please? Now, there are two important questions in the CSP format here that are worth highlighting. This question 3, based on your written discounting policies, standard commercial sales practices, if there are no written policies. The CSP format asks, are the discounts and concessions you offer the government equal to or better than your best price? So again, this is kind of the central question that the contracting officer is trying to establish with your offer. And most of the time, as I'll talk more about, the contractor will answer no, that the price being given to the government is not their best price. This next question in 4B, do any deviations from your written policies or standard commercial sales practices disclosed in the above chart ever result in better discounts, as in lower prices or concessions than those indicated? So do you ever deviate from your policies or practices in a way that results in a lower price? And usually the answer to this question is going to be yes. This calls to mind Gilbert and Sullivan's operetta, HMS Pinafore. The captain of the HMS Pinafore brags about all the undesirable things that he doesn't do. So he says, I'm never sick at sea. And the chorus says, what, never? No, never. What, never? Well, hardly ever. So he admits once in a while he gets sick at sea. Contractors have to approach this question in the same way and think about the exceptions to the rule. And figure 515.4 in the Gsar offers examples of deviations where contractors might offer a lower price or deeper discount than what they say in their CSP. So, and one of the more prominent examples is to compensate an otherwise disgruntled customer. Not uncommon to give an extra price cut if a customer is upset. But they list other examples: one-time goodwill discounts to charity organizations, limited sales of obsolete or damaged goods, sale of sample goods to a new customer, or sales of prototype goods for testing purposes. We can go to the next slide, please. So it's very important. Commercial sales practices format has to be current, accurate, and complete. You're making a certification and submitting the CSP format. If there are changes to commercial price lists or discounts or discounting policies between when you submit your GSA schedule offer and when negotiations are complete, which often takes some time, and it's not uncommon to have to do a refresh. An update is required. And there's a clause that provides for a price adjustment if the information that's in the award proves to be inaccurate. So if that information in the CSP doesn't include all the required information, if the information is outdated, inaccurate, or incomplete, and then if there are changes that aren't disclosed between submission and negotiation, conclusion of negotiation. So there is a small window. So the clause provides that information must be current and accurate and complete within 14 calendar days of the date it is submitted. If we can go to the next slide. So a couple takeaways for contractors for schedule offers, I should say, from these parts of the GSAR. Contractors aren't actually under a legal obligation to offer most favored customer prices to the federal government, and most companies don't offer their best price in their schedule proposals. GSA schedule guidance for agencies, in fact, suggests requesting additional discounts on orders. So it's actually generally advisable to have at least some room in your scheduled pricing for spot discounts on orders. If you don't offer most favored customer prices, the government is likely to ask for justification for why you are not doing so, and the factors at 538-270 1E can provide support there. The basis of award customer is extremely important. Establishing that's the customer or category of customer that will serve as the baseline for price reductions. So the offeror isn't required to propose that the government will receive the same prices or discounts as the basis of award customer. The important thing is maintaining the relationship between the prices and discounts, or the ratio. So the government will typically take the position that the basis of award customer or class of customer should be defined broadly. For example, to include all sales or all commercial sales. And the contractor typically takes a narrow position, is advised to take a narrow position because the price reduction clause compliance has to be manageable. And if you define the basis of award customer to include all of your commercial sales, that can become unworkable in complying with the price reductions clause during contract performance. So you have to be very intentional about that, and it may take longer to negotiate a narrower basis of award customer with the government. And it may be more difficult to justify, but it'll pay dividends during contract performance because it'll be easier to to manage your compliance obligations. And in some cases, contractors will even define their basis of award customer as a single customer, which may make it even easier to and more manageable to then comply with the price reductions clause during the contract. And the key thing, again, is the relationship between the proposed price, the basis of award, and the commercial price list. And that'll be the frame of reference, looking at those 3 data points during performance. Can we go to the next slide, please? So again, before award, the contracting officer and offeror, this is in the price reductions clause itself, 552, 238, 81. The government and the contractor will agree on the basis of award, customer, category of customer, and the price or discount relationship. Again, we're looking at a ratio here that has to be maintained. And then changes to the contractor's commercial pricing or discounts then have to be met with price reductions in the prices to the government under the schedule. And the contractor is required to report to the contracting officer the price reductions that fall into the coverage under the clause and explain the conditions under which the reductions were made. And the timing of that notice is within 15 calendar days after its effective date, so or as soon as possible. So the clause talks about events that trigger price reductions. Include revisions to the price list upon which the award was predicated, that where prices are in fact reduced on that price list or catalog. Also, the price reduction clause can be triggered if the contractor offers widespread discounts to non-federal customers, even if the price list itself isn't formally revised. And then if the contractor offers special discounts to basis of award customers or special discounts to non-basis of award customers beyond those that are identified during contract negotiations, all those things can trigger price reductions. So the clause does specify certain events that do not trigger the price reductions clause. Actually, before we get to those, I should mention, of course, the sales outside the basis of award, as long as they're within the disclosed commercial practices of the contractor, don't trigger the price reductions clause. And also sales of products or services that aren't on schedule shouldn't trigger the price reductions clause. But then there are a few other non-triggers called out in the PRC. Discounts to commercial customers under fixed price definite quantity contracts that are above the maximum order threshold in the schedule is kind of a special exception. And then discounts that are offered to federal agencies or to state and local governments on schedule orders. I'm not going to talk about it today, but the use of the GSA schedules is not limited to federal agencies. It's possible for state and local governments to be authorized to make schedule buys as well. And those can also be eligible for exemption from price reductions. And then errors in quotation or billing, as long as you disclose the error and document it to the agency, the price reduction clause doesn't make you reduce your prices based on a mistake. And then just to speak generally to compliance with the price reduction clause, again, you're maintaining the relationship at bottom between the GSA price, the basis of award price, and the commercial list price. And compliance here really requires a compliance program ensuring communication between the contract and sales folks and anyone else who's making sales or discounting decisions. And it takes a sustained effort during contract performance, and it takes some pricing discipline to make sure that you're staying in compliance with the price reductions clause. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, GSA in recent years has been testing out a different approach to the commercial sales practices and price reduction clause schedule approach, which is transactional data reporting. And it's a pilot program. The vision is that TDR contractors will report transactional data to GSA each month, and contracting officers will use a prices paid database that has all this transaction data to inform order decisions. So if there's the idea is that if there's a robust database about the prices that are actually paid for schedule items, that that's a better way for a contracting officer to know how much that she or he should be paying for schedule items, and that obviates the need for the price reduction clause, which has never been a popular mechanism with industry. And so the clause 552.216.75 includes the transactional data elements. I should mention the pilot program included, it started before schedule consolidation. It includes 8 schedules, which GSA characterized as products and commodified services. And they make up a significant part of the overall schedules program. I think at the time that they GSA introduced the transactional data reporting pilot program, the eligible schedules made up about 40% of the overall sales under the program. But in order to participate in TDR, contractors had to opt in, and they also have to have an eligible schedule, and under some of the schedules, only certain special item numbers are eligible for the pilot. Although if one of the special item numbers that is covered is part of the schedule offer, then the entire contract becomes eligible for the TDR pilot. These are the data elements. I won't go through each of them that are required to be reported under the clause. We can go to the next slide, please. And the reporting is accomplished through a web-based system or by uploading the data according to GSA instructions, and all of that's spelled out in the contract. And the GSA acquisition manual at 538.272 provides for evaluation of offers with access to transactional data. And there won't, of course, there isn't a commercial sales practices format for TDR schedule offers. And so the contracting officer takes a different approach. The contracting officer is supposed to look at the prices paid information on contract for the same or similar items, or other contract level prices on other multiple award schedule contracts or other government-wide contracts, and then look at other commercial data sources first in making a price reasonableness determination. And if none of those options work, then the contracting officer is supposed to perform market research. But COs can and often do require other than certified cost or pricing data for award of scheduled contracts under the TDR program. So the TDR program has gotten kind of mixed reviews, I should say. GSA did announce last year that the TDR program would be continued and expanded. The GSA Office of Inspector General issued a very unfavorable audit report about the TDR program, which concluded, among other things, that the TDR data is inaccurate and unreliable, and that contracting officers weren't using it to make pricing decisions. GSA responded to that report and disagreed with the recommendation, and said essentially that they were going to move forward with the focused expansion of the TDR program. Industry groups have been pretty supportive of TDR, and I quote on this slide from a Federal News Network article by Roger Waldron of the Coalition for Government Procurement. He said, TDR recognizes that pricing and best value are driven by competition at the order level for agency-specific requirements. and it reduces administrative burdens and risk on schedule contractors as compared to the outdated anti-competitive legacy pricing policies, especially the price reduction clause. So commentators have, again, kind of given it mixed reviews. Of course, inaccuracy and unreliability of data are significant issues that need to be addressed. But if this approach does prove workable, as GSA still believes that it will be, I think government and industry would favor transitioning to this approach, but it remains to be seen whether that'll be a success. So industrial funding fee and sales reporting. GSA schedules are, it's a self-funded program, and that funding comes from the industrial funding fee, which is a fee that is ultimately paid by customer agencies, but the payment mechanism, it's kind of like a sales tax. The contractor builds in the industrial funding fee in their prices and then recoups it from the buying agency and pays it back to GSA. GSA uses the money to administer the schedules program. Actually, I say and then some here on the slide because the IFF actually exceeds the cost to GSA of administering the schedules program. As I note, the scheduled prices are required to be inclusive of IFF, so it's not a separate line item. And then 552.238.80 spells out some of the information about the IFF and sales reporting. The reporting of sales depends on whether the contract is part of the TDR pilot program or is a traditional CSP. It's either done monthly for TDR or quarterly for the traditional commercial sales practices approach. And in either case, the reports are submitted within 30 days of the end of the reporting period. The IFF fee amount is 0.75%. Even if you have 0 sales, that also has to be reported. And the reported sales figures, again, have to include the amount of the IFF. And the contract will include additional directions on the mechanics of paying the IFF. So talked about price, the price reductions clause. Price increases are also possible under the GSA schedules program. They're handled under a different clause or potentially a couple of different clauses, but the most common clause is 552.216.70, economic price adjustment, FSS multiple award schedule. There are specific conditions and requirements for economic price adjustments. Of course, this is an area with the current inflation levels that has received additional attention. So the circumstances that allow for price increases or changes to the price list that the contractor's offer is based on, but there are limits to the number of increases and the frequency of increases. So only 3 increases considered during the contract period. Increases are requested after the first 30 days or before the last 60 days of the contract period, and there has to be at least 30 days between requests. There are also different rules on multi-year contracts. You can't get price increases during the first year. And then the aggregate maximum percentage caps and max of 3 increases apply for each year of the multi-year contract. There's also a maximum aggregate increase of 10% normally. The contracting officer can deviate from that with approval from the contracting director, is the standard rule under the clause. If we can go to the next slide, please. So GSA, responding to the recent increase in the rate of inflation, issued a letter granting temporary flexibility for economic price adjustments on scheduled contracts. And really what it does is it lowers the level of approval required to deviate from that 10%. It relaxes the time limits and frequency requirements for economic price adjustment increases so that contractors aren't bleeding too badly on some of these things, and the contracting officer has discretion subject to approval above the one level above the contracting officer level for different aggregate increases to give some pass on some flexibility to the contractor. And the letter says in it, it talks about why this is in the government's interest, in addition to obviously being in contractors' interests. The senior procurement executive says, while EPA clauses normally act to protect GSA's interests, in the current marketplace, they make it harder for federal agencies to acquire needed goods, services, and solutions. Contractors are removing items from the federal supply schedule contracts to avoid selling at a loss. This particularly hurts new entrants and small businesses, the very firms the president's initiatives around procurement equity are designed to support. And so to ensure that GSA is able to continue offering a full range of products, services, and solutions, GSA must be flexible in how it applies these EPA contract clauses. So certainly a move that is welcomed by industry. We can go to the next slide, please. Order level materials. So this is an issue that has been around a long time in GSA schedule contracts. Order level materials are ancillary items that aren't specifically identified in a schedule contract, but are necessary for performance. And 538.72 governs order level materials. We can go to the next slide. So order level materials, there are some rules. They have to be in support of an order and not the primary basis or purpose of the order. It's supposed to be ancillary, so the overall value of order level materials can't exceed 33.33% of a task or delivery order or like a purchase agreement. And OLMs have to have a special SIN, and the prices have to include the IFF. And contractors are supposed to get 3 quotes or include justification in the file why they weren't able to get 3 quotes. Or if they have an approved purchasing system, they can follow that. Contractors can also propose indirect costs associated with acquiring order level materials, such as material handling or subcontract administration costs. But those have to be proposed as a fixed amount rather than as a percentage of cost, and again, have to include the IFF. Go to the next slide. Modifications. So this clause 552, 538, 82 governs adding and deleting from schedule contracts. It can include additional items or SINs, and they require a new CSP and new discount information for the new SINs. And if you do in fact delete an item from your schedule contract, the government reserves the right to reject a subsequent offer or for the same item or a substantially equal item at a higher price during the same contract period. So kind of barring contractors from gaming the system if the higher price is unreasonable compared to the deleted item. And one important note when it comes to modifications, that contractors should exercise caution in checking boxes indicating that pricing and discounting remains the same. Again, that's a certification, so you need to take that seriously and look into it before you check that box. Gsar 552, 238, 83 addresses examination of records by GSA and just hits on some of the items that may be audited after the fact, so overbillings, billing errors, price reductions, and the IFF and sales reporting. There's an audit authority within 3 years after final payment. Now, that concludes the highlights of the Federal Supply Schedules program. I wanted to touch on a couple of other parts of the Gsar and GSAM that are of particular interest. So one item that is noteworthy is the treatment in the regulations and in a Gsar clause of commercial supplier agreement terms that are deemed incompatible with federal law. Now, I probably don't need to tell you that the federal government is not like you and me, and that it's subject to many special rules when it's a party to a contract. And most of the time, the government follows the rules by writing the contracts. But when contractors write the contracts or write, in this case, commercial supplier agreements, there are terms that the government can't accept as a matter of federal law. And so the Gsar addresses this. There is no kind of universal list of federal laws and limitations on what terms the government can agree to. But the coverage in the Gsar is some of the more detailed coverage or position by an agency as to what the government cannot accept. So in 502.101 of the Gsar spells out the definition of commercial supplier agreements, terms and conditions customarily offered to the public by vendors of commercial supplies or services. And they're particularly common, it notes, in IT acquisitions, including software, but can apply to any product or service. Notably, the reason that it's common with software in particular is that the FAR and DFARs favor acquisition of commercial computer software under licenses customarily provided to the public. So terms of service agreements or end user license agreements come up a lot in IT acquisitions. And it notes in B here of the definition that it applies regardless of the media or delivery mechanism. So it doesn't have to be written terms and conditions. It can be terms and conditions that pop up when you use software. So can we go to the next slide, please? So the first thing to note, unenforceable obligations, where supplies or services are required subject to a commercial supplier agreement, clauses that either require the government to pay future costs or that include open-ended indemnification clauses are unenforceable if they would create an Anti-Deficiency Act violation. There are a whole list of other unenforceable clauses in 552, 232, 78. So if there's a clause in a commercial supplier agreement that provides for governing law or forum that is different from federal law and the specified statutory forums, that is negated. It mentions in the clause here that this applies notwithstanding any other provision of this agreement, that when the end user is an agency or instrumentality of the federal government, it also takes precedence in the event of a conflict over the other clauses. So this is a list that spans over 2 slides that talks about. I started to mention federal law has to govern the agreement and dictate forum and venue, and also specifies the limitations period for disputes. And so a end user license agreement can't say it's governed by California law. The end user here has to be the government itself, and government employees can't be bound by an end user license agreement. There are also limits on automatic renewals, changes to the terms and conditions after issuance. There has to be a bilateral modification. Achieving any substantive changes that are material after the original award. Generally, arbitration clauses are also unenforceable. Go to the next slide. So I already mentioned that open-ended indemnification clauses that violate the Anti-Deficiency Act aren't permitted, but there are also commonly language and indemnity clauses that specify defense, and the indemnity clauses have to be revised to provide that DOJ has the sole right to represent the United States in an indemnifiable situation. There are also rules about audits, taxes or surcharges, and there's a non-assignment section as well. And then confidential information, there are restrictions based on the Freedom of Information Act. So neither the agreement itself or the price list can be considered confidential information, and the government has the right to retain confidential information as required by law. Couple final points. So the General Services Acquisition Manual in 517.5 addresses interagency acquisitions. I mentioned that even beyond the schedules program, there are other important interagency acquisitions, GWACs and MACs, that for which GSA is the servicing agency. And so there are a couple of interesting provisions. This 517.5 and the GSAM addresses cutoff dates for accepting interagency acquisitions and timeframes for contracting activities to obligate funds, and it requires reviews of undelivered orders. But of particular interest, it specifies the order of precedence if there's a conflict between GSA's policies and the customer agency, the requesting agency. So it spells out if the funding agency has a more restrictive policy than GSA, then the contracting officer is required to follow the funding agency's policy. If the requesting agency's policy is less restrictive, then the contracting officer has discretion, but if the CO chooses the less restrictive policy, then that requires consultation with service level acquisition management and legal to ensure that there are adequate controls for to protect GSA. And then there can be a streamlined approach if funding agencies require less documentation for certain actions. And there's also a rule about specialty program authority. So generally, if requesting agencies have authorities that GSA doesn't have, then GSA can't automatically use those authorities. So other transaction authority is the example that they offer, but there can be special approval potentially by GSA senior procurement executive or special delegation circumstances, but that's the default rule. You can go to the next slide, please. And finally, I mentioned that GSA, as the civilian government's primary landlord, has leasehold interest responsibilities. So the Public Building Service is the GSA component that handles leasing. Leases are not governed either by the FAR or most of the provisions of the Gsar, except that Gsar Part 570 governs acquisition of leasehold interests, which are defined as conveyances to the government of the right or of exclusive possession of real property for a definite period of time by a landlord. And so the Gsar Part 570 does incorporate other parts of the Gsar, but both the Gsar and the FAR are generally inapplicable. We don't have time to kind of delve into the details of Part 570, but it's worth knowing that it's there when the circumstances arise.
Thank you again, Daniel, for such a great presentation. Thank you to everyone who participated and to our sponsors. The recordings and slides will be available within about the next 24 hours. This concludes our webinar. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.